Shonen anime movies have been a part of the genre since forever, with Dragon Ball spawning 21 of them. Every popular long-running shonen manga gets an anime, but it also seems to spawn a movie series as well. Naruto has had 11 movies, Bleach in its heyday got 4. It just seems to be a weird tradition where any shonen manga that gets big enough also gets a movie, and then things change. The popular series Demon Slayer got a movie, but unlike the other series, this movie wasn't an original story separate from the main canon. Instead, it adapted the Mugen Train arc of the manga, serving as a direct continuation of the beloved anime series. And it took the world by storm, becoming the highest-grossing film of all time in Japan and making $500 million in total worldwide. Mugen Train mania took over the small island nation and the anime world at large. People just couldn't get enough of it. They even had a real-life Mugen Train steam its way across the Japanese railroads. So this has led to a new era where every major big series is trying to get a canon movie out. Jujutsu Kaisen had its prequel movie, Jujutsu Kaisen Zero, which adapted the manga Zero volume of the pre-serialization chapters. The hit volleyball series Haikyuu is apparently now also going to feature its final arc being adapted into a series of movies. It's movie mania, which leads to an interesting question. My Hero Academia has had 3 movies, all released under the supervision of Kohei Horikoshi, but are they canon to the manga? The question gets a little tricky, especially with a few recent developments that have been seen. So let's get into it and see if we can figure out if the My Hero movies are actually canon, or if we can dismiss them as filler fluff that can be completely ignored. You gotta love to be gone back yet. Love is a 10 out of it, don't you grab it. So I think you all know the drill by now. Popular manga gets picked up by a production company after running a few years of publication. It becomes a big anime. The anime helps further increase the series' popularity, and eventually it leads to a theatrical movie being made. And to be honest, most of these movies are never very good. They typically revolve around taking usually two-dimensional characters, repeat some lessons they learned in the show. There's typically a filler side character that they are forced to pair up with for the duration of the flick. You get a generic bad guy who gets slightly better animation who says stuff like this. Being strong is the only thing that matters. Friends will only hold you back. The weak should be purged from the earth. I will make a new world where only the strong survive. I hate my dad a lot. These characters are so goddamn boring and just serve as vessels before the main character can use some sort of movie-exclusive upgraded version of their signature power to vanquish the big bad guy before they run off to the sunset, waving to the movie-only supporting character before we proceed to never see them again. These movies are basically expensive fan fiction, but not even really good fan fiction where the characters hook up in a steamy romance or do cringy crossovers with characters from other franchises, just kind of the lame weak sauce stuff that's bland and inoffensive. It's this that has made shonen anime movies kind of skippable for anyone but the most diehard enthusiast. I mean, what's the point if you know nothing substantial is going to happen? The characters aren't going to change and just repeat the 1 or 2 gimmicks they have. The events that happen are never going to be discussed in the main canon, so why waste the time? But then things changed in 2009. One Piece, which had had 9 movies previously, had its 10th feature film, was to have a storyline explicitly written by series creator Eiichiro Oda. And Oda went all out. He created a new antagonist, Shiki the Golden Lion, who has deep ties to some of the biggest lore characters like the Pirate King himself, Gol D. Roger. He even released a special chapter to tie into the movie that showcased dozens of characters in the series 20 years before the main series timeline, basically going out of his way to include his original movie creation into a sort of soft continuity for his ongoing manga series. Of course, outside of Shiki the Golden Lion, the events of Strong World are never mentioned, except for the backstory, so the movie enters into a new state of pseudo-canon. But this was a big change-up to what had been done previously. Recently, Oda even admitted his involvement with most of the recent One Piece movies has changed the culture of Shonen Jump. In an interview with fellow mangaka of the long-running Detective Conan series, Gosho Aoyama, Oda admits to creating a culture in the magazine where young mangakas are encouraged to be involved in their series movies. Still, I feel bad for my junior mangaka. I created a culture at Jump in which the movie would be a success if the original author gets involved. So everyone has started to be borrowed to work on them. To my surprise, though, these youngsters are really enjoying it. If you could have the original creator involved, then you have the biggest chance of success. The logistics of creating a movie story that'll perfectly complement an ongoing manga is next to impossible, but the more creative supervision you have from the series' original creator, the more legit the narrative is perceived. Then everything changed in 2020 with Demon Slayer Mugen Train. Here was a film that wasn't an independently created side story, but rather the actual canon of the manga adapted into a film form, a direct continuation of the popular anime series. It was unprecedented in terms of telling a canon story from the manga instead of some filler side story, and that risk also saw an unprecedented amount of success. With it began the rise of the canon movie. Jujutsu Kaisen released its prequel story, Jujutsu Kaisen 0, as a film. Being so successful, it became one of the highest-grossing anime films of all time, with it currently at number 6 at the time of this writing, making nearly $200 million worldwide. The long-running series Gintama's finale was released as a movie. The popular volleyball series Haikyuu is having its final arc adapted into some movies. The rise of the canon movie is here, and also trying to ride in the coattails of this is My Hero Academia. I'd say that out of all the mangaka who worked on these films based on their work, Horikoshi seemed to try and put in the most effort to try and connect the continuities of his series and movies based on his work as revealed in this interview. Horikoshi, you are listed as the creator and supervisor of the movie. Exactly what did you work on? I worked on many things, such as the design for David and Melissa, as well as what I want to have in the movie's plot and what I want characters to do. And we discussed this thoroughly with director Nagasaki and the movie staff. I also read the scripts and offered my own opinions with the direction of how the story should go. The movie contains an original story, but does it have any correlation to the current story in the serialized manga? I always wanted to include a chapter about All Might's past, or rather I thought that I definitely need to write about his past. In the movie, the young All Might is shown studying abroad in America, and I thought this might not be something that could be brought up anymore in the actual manga story up until now, so I saw the movie as a chance to present this. Of course, without a doubt, the movie and manga are joined, and the movie story is connected to the manga story that happens after it. To his credit, he does the smart thing here. He knew he wouldn't really have the time in the main story to go into All Might's past, so he uses the space of the movie to try and give him more of a backstory. He also is smart by trying to give scenes that he knows fans would like to see in the movie as well, like the part in the first film which features a father-son smash attack as Deku teams up with All Might to give one final attack to the film's villain. Given that the movie is supposed to take place just before Season 3 and the infamous hideout raid where All Might sacrifices his powers, it's a great point to give something that the main series will never be able to deliver. Horikoshi even goes to even a greater length to have the first movie be a part of the continuity of the main series. In the intro sequence where we see All Might battling in America as he studies up to become a hero, he saves a little girl, and that little girl winds up growing up to become Star and Stripe, the #1 hero of America, who gets featured prominently later in the manga with her epic battle against Shigaraki. He also introduces a hero gadget called the Full Gauntlet that lets Deku use his one-for-all powers without destroying his arms, and even brings back the gloves for use in the final arc of the series. To his credit, this is a super strong way to do a callback and make the movie not feel like a complete waste of time. But the big problem is that we never see any of the students of 1A talk about the events of the film. Its villain, Wolfram, is never mentioned again. Even David and his daughter, Melissa, fall off the face of the earth, never to make any serious impact on the larger series, making it feel like filler. I'd say by introducing Star and Stripe, it is a big deal to call back to the events of the movie and make them feel like they have more weight. But the fact that neither Deku and none of the other characters ever talk about the events of Island makes this feel like a filler that never happened. Good job, Horikoshi, on doing the big level callback, but you gotta have the main guys talk a little bit more to reinforce Melissa in the manga if you really want to sell this as full canon. It's hard. I'm leaning on calling this movie not canon, but I think it's probably better to do it on a percentage scale. So I'd say this movie is like 20% canon, 80% filler. Now we move on to the next film, Heroes Rising, where Class 1A goes on a remote island so they can practice hero work in the field. Horikoshi literally loves dragging these kids away from the mainland, so all the movie shit can happen on random islands so nobody has to bring it up again. This film has probably my least favorite trope out of all these things, and that's the original kid characters who bond and learn to look up to the main series characters. I know little kids being saved by Deku has been an established thing, like with Kota and Eri, but these kids are just so much more generic. They are my least favorite kind of side characters, just boring additions that seem to soak up all the life in the room. Then there's the villain, who's also kind of generic. He does get a tiny bit of screen time with the series' main baddies, the League of Villains, but he's just another one of those generic, I will make the world where only the strong survive kind of baddies. He has some loose lore connections to the main villain, All for One, being a guy who can use 9 quirks and who was surgically implanted by All for One's doctor with the ability to use multiple quirks, but he, along with his henchmen, are probably the least interesting things, and their only purpose is to provide fight set pieces. To the film's credit, I do think it does a decent job of showcasing the other characters in Class 1A and giving them moments to shine in the final act showdown. But by the same token, it falls into too many of the tired and used tropes that we see in too many of these movies. I don't care about the little kids who don't like heroes, but then learn that heroes are actually great. This is bad fan fiction shit. But then Horikoshi does something ridiculous. Something I never thought I'd see in one of these movies. In the final act, as the villain 9 overpowers all the student heroes, it looks like everyone has been defeated, even Deku and Bakugo are on the ropes, but Deku does the unthinkable. He passes on his power of One for All and shares it with Bakugo, and the two proceed to give the greatest animated beatdown ever seen in a movie like this. I remember seeing it in theaters and I was shell-shocked. This is kind of an end-of-the-series kind of move, something that you'd save for the final battle of the final chapter. To see such a big idea thrown away in a movie left me gobsmacked. And funnily enough, Horikoshi said this would be the final movie based on the series, since he was looking to wrap it up soon. Although that wasn't the case. My Hero Academia went on for a bit longer, and we did get a third movie, which we'll be discussing later. In a special volume that was released with the movie, Horikoshi discussed his reasoning and rationale for seemingly throwing away such a hype moment and putting it into the movie instead of the main series. I think there are a lot of people who are confused by Deku passing One for All in this movie, since, like I said earlier, this is a big event for what makes up the core of Deku, and the whole manga really. That's why I had them skip over the anime timeline to the manga timeline for the movie. I don't think Deku would have made this choice if it wasn't for the fight after the provincial license exam, and I don't think Bakugo would have accepted it without that either. The movie is set at the timeline where All Might, Deku, and Bakugo have shared the secret of One for All, and where Bakugo, even knowing the power of One for All, has continued to improve himself and is starting to understand the meaning of save in the phrase win to save. He's found the answer like he demonstrated during the Class A versus Class B training. I think the passing of One for All works in the movie because the relationship between the three of them has slowly been changing. The final exams have ended and it's winter now. By the way, due to the length of the movie, we weren't able to show all of it, but there's a reason none of One for All's power was left with Bakugo. In the timeline where the movie is, the will of the predecessors has started to interfere with things. The will of One for All, a power All Might doesn't even know, is in motion, and that's how it ended up that way. This was also possible thanks to making the movie ahead of the anime and in the manga timeline. I think it's unusual for a movie to go ahead of the timeline of the current airing anime, but I think the timeline had to be set in winter this time to make the shocking events believable. What's especially interesting is he talks about timelines and how he views the anime and manga timelines as separate things. The shocking thing was how the movie incorporated several things that hadn't been seen in the anime yet while it was still airing. The movie marks the first time the infamous character Hawks appears on screen. The big number 2 hero serves a pivotal role later in the series. It also features Deku's Air Force gloves, which hadn't been introduced in the anime yet. The movie at the time of its release did a lot of surprising things. Even the villain 9 gets brought up again by being shown later drawn into the manga. But sadly, despite the cataclysmic event of sharing One for All with Bakugo, the power returns to Midoriya and Bakugo has no memory of the incident. The events of Nabu Island are never mentioned or brought up again. Maybe in the final arc, Deku shares One for All with all the students of 1A to beat up All for One or Shigaraki, and he remembers doing this. That could make this a canon storyline, kind of like how Naruto shares the Kyuubi Fox energy with all the other ninjas during the 4th Ninja War, but it feels like Horikoshi gave up on doing something like that and decided to just give Deku more quirks by having him communicate with the previous users of One for All. But we'll see. I could be proven wrong in a few weeks of writing this, as the final arc is still ongoing, and just recently Deku is finally facing off against Shigaraki. So on the canon scale, I'm giving this like 10% canon, 90% filler. 9 coming back to the manga is a nice little touch, even if it's only for a montage panel. But the fact that nobody ever mentions it and the little kids are never seen again just means most of the film feels pretty inconsequential. It's cool to see such a huge idea of Horikoshi used and given the movie treatment, but I think I'd like to see it in the main series instead. So now we come to the final movie, My Hero Academia World Heroes Mission. Horikoshi didn't wrap up his manga so quickly, so he thought of going beyond the original target of 30 volumes he set for himself, so why not do another movie? The promotion material sees Deku, Bakugo, and Shoto in cool stealth uniforms with the Twitter accounts promoting the reveal of the 3 Musketeers, who are of course the 3 most popular and powerful characters in Class 1A. This This movie I really didn't like. It felt like the most fillery of all three. Basically, there's an evil terrorist organization that wants to release a gas that causes people's quirks to go out of control that winds up killing them. Deku gets framed for a crime he didn't commit and needs to go on the run with the new filler character, Rudy Soul, who I find just really, really boring. I think the main problem is that the villains are really generic, with the goons having next to no personality. The main mirror guy is as generic as these bad guys get, and the scale of the story is just too big to not ever be brought up again. Like, I can't imagine nobody would ever talk about Midoriya being put on an international most wanted list after being framed for murder, and that wouldn't come up again ever in the series. Not to mention that it's such a global crisis, you think it'd be referenced by some of the other characters later in the series. But man, oh man, after the success of Demon Train, they went really, really hard to try and connect this movie to the anime series that was running to give the unwitting audiences the impression that this was some big canon story. The anime rejiggered its timeline to put the Endeavor Agency arc before My Villain Academia to create a new timeline that completely threw away one of the best arcs in the series and throws it under the bus, making a chronology that makes no sense in the anime. But the scale is just too big to have Deku involved in an international incident and for it all to be hand-waved away. I think a core appeal of My Hero Academia and the shonen landscape is how relatively low scale it is. It's a world with superpowers, but people aren't flying around shooting planet-sized energy beams. It's a low-scale power system, helps it feel approachable. Destroying a building or city block is a big deal in MHA, and I think this adds a lot to its charm. But having such a huge worldwide incident just throws that all out of the water, and I don't care what you say, Rudy Soul is a boring character, and the fact that he never gets mentioned again just proves my point that this movie is entirely filler. So on a filler scale, we're going 100% filler, all non-canon. I'm sorry, I know you worked really, really hard to try and make this seem like a Mugen Train level event, but it just isn't. This is a Naruto movie at best, which pissed me off because I saw one of my favorite arcs torn to shreds to accommodate this mediocre dreck. And yes, we will be talking about the evisceration of My Villain Academia in the anime. You can count on that. So as far as these things go, I have to commend Horikoshi for trying. He definitely went a step further than a lot of other mangaka in regards to trying to turn these movies into canon events, but it seems like he operates that these movies work within the anime timeline, and that's almost a separate universe from the manga timeline. Which is okay, but I'd say most of the really successful shonen anime are pretty faithful and strict in regards to following the canon. That's why they become successful. They double and triple down on what people like. That's why Demon Slayer is an earth-shattering success. That's why Jujutsu Kaisen is a rising superstar. It's probably why the Chainsaw anime is going to rip and tear apart the internet. I don't want to waste time with terrible stories that feel inconsequential and are forgettable. I don't care about Melissa Shield or Rudy Soul or those stupid kids from the second movies. All the villains have felt especially generic and forgettable despite how ham Bones goes in animating their big final fight scenes. So I'd say that mostly the movies are not canon. What they are is so inconsequential that you can enjoy the manga and the anime by skipping them entirely. They tried, but in a post-Mugen Train world, the audience will not accept substitutes for the canon. We want the real deal canon from the original author. If you can't give us that, then you better find some interesting lore we wouldn't see otherwise. Take, for example, the most recent One Piece film, Film Red. This is another One Piece film that had Oda's supervision, but Oda went all out to try and do everything he could to beat Mugen Train. He used the biggest lore bomb possible. He had the movie that featured Shanks, the biggest lore figure of One Piece, who has done next to nothing in the most of the series, the most famous pirate, one of the four emperors, the man who gave Luffy his iconic straw hat, has had probably collectively maybe 10 or 20 minutes of screen time across all of One Piece's 1,000+ episodes and chapters. Oda puts him in the movie. Sure, he won't meet with Luffy directly like the iconic Romance Dawn goal set up, with Luffy returning the straw hat to him once he becomes a great pirate, but we do finally get to see the crew in action. People like Ben Beckman and Lucky Roo, who have terribly unintimidating early Oda designs but are also the most feared and powerful pirates in the entire series, finally get to spring onto the scene and wreck shit. It's the kind of fan service One Piece fans have been dying to see ever since Shanks single-handedly ended the war in Marineford. And people around the world who got to see the movie went nuts for it.
Toujours aux avant-premières parce que ça ajoute vraiment d'émotion, grosse communauté.
reactions are because people have been literally waiting 2 decades to see Shanks do anything. Oda went as far as to throw in some Gear 5 Luffy long before the form makes its anime debut. I don't know if I could say the film is canon, but it's a cavalcade of riches for One Piece fans in terms of showing off stuff they've always wanted to see. He even dropped some big lore nuggets in the pamphlet handed out before the movie about Shanks' lineage, which you can go look up if you're a spoiler hound like me. I think if you can't do a full canon movie, then at least make your movie around some facet of lore that we, the audience, want to see. To a degree, the My Hero movies try this, and I do commend Horikoshi for taking the extra effort to reincorporate designs and ideas back into the main series, like the full gauntlets from the Two Heroes movie coming back in the form of mid-gauntlets. But there are too many tropes that I despise. Boring, unnecessary side characters, boring villains, events that nobody talks about in the main continuity. My Hero movies are better than their contemporaries, but in a post-Mugen Train and Jujutsu Kaisen Zero world, where the movies are actual real canon adapted straight from the manga, it's hard to accept any kind of substitute. So I give you my big pronouncement. Despite their best efforts, the My Hero movies are not canon. But as a scholar of shonen anime and developments of the anime world, they are an interesting missing link, a literal Bigfoot serving as the evolutionary bridge leading from the shonen filler movies of the past to the canon movies of today. But as they say in Breaking Bad,
I chose a half measure when I should have gone all the way. No more half measures, Walter.
half measures can only take you so far, and that's what the My Hero movies ultimately are, a series of half measures. Hope you enjoyed that video. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Are My Hero movies canon or not canon? Go over to the community tab and vote, of course. Let me know in the comments section as well. Which ones did you like the most and which ones did you absolutely hate? Of course, here's the part of the video where I talk about the darkest villain of YouTube, Stanley Tucci.
Algorithm, math. Why can't we make what we want to make the way we want to make it?
The literal manifestation of One for All. Yes, it is by his machine learning dark design of algorithms that determines if a video soars or fails. But only you have the power to push through Tucci's dark designs. Only you have the power to justify the time I spend making videos and not doing something more productive like learning to code. So like, comment, subscribe. That is the only way to win the day. Only you can validate my herodom of spending lots of time writing essays about My Hero Academia. So go forth, use your power of the social media One for All and hit those buttons. A special thank you to my patrons for making My Hero Month possible. Coming up is a special link to the My Hero Month playlist where you can watch every video I've made for this annual tradition. Go there and binge that playlist. Give me that special watch time that'll give me the power to battle Stanley Tucci. I'd love to see more heroes join the ranks and see my videos early. So see you next week with my next video of My Hero Month 2022.